Hey everybody, welcome to the Wise Podcast. My name is Adam McLean. This week's episode is going to come to you just in one segment. It's with Mark Oestreicher. He's going to share this question he's been thinking about from Youth Ministry 3.0.
Hey, Marko here. And I don't even know if we have a name for this segment, if it's like Coffee Talk with Marko or Inside the Mind of Marko or what. But what I want to kind of do is toss out something that I'm wrestling with right now and suggest that you think about it, or that you get together with some other youth workers and talk about it. Maybe have coffee or lunch with some other youth workers from your church or from other churches in your area, and this might just be some discussion fodder for you, okay? I wrote this book recently, which I am not here to pimp, but Youth Ministry 3.0, that I know some of you have read, and many of you are part of this great Facebook discussion group we've had with all kinds of interaction and wrestling. And that book was very much a work in progress, not a here's the final way to think about this kind of a book. And because it was a work in process or work in progress, my mind has continued to evolve and change. And just this very last week, I've really had a huge question about one of my contentions in the book. So I want to share that with you. In the book, I talk about these three epochs of youth ministry. Youth Ministry 1.0 being like post-World War II to roughly 1970, when we were kind of focused a lot on things like proclamation and evangelism and correction. Youth ministry was really kind of youthy church services with preaching to kids in age-appropriate ways and stuff. It was all good and right for its time and appropriate and everything. I'm not here to rip on those different epochs. And then, in the late 60s, early 70s, kind of some new ways of doing youth ministry arose. I call that Youth Ministry 2.0. And during that epoch that lasted roughly till the end of the millennium, there was kind of a shift to thinking about programs and creating a youth group, creating a positive peer group, and focusing on discipleship. And a real shift occurred. And a lot of good things came in, a lot of bad things came in too, and I think YS has even been kind of responsible for perpetuating some of that. We're trying to undo some of that now. I think since the turn of the millennium, we've seen kind of a new focus in youth ministry, or youth culture at least, that I'd call Youth Culture 3.0 or Youth Ministry 3.0, and that's just a new focus on being present to teenagers rather than being program-driven or proclamation-driven, and that we need to have kind of real key themes of communion with one another and mission together as we move out into the work of the kingdom of God. In this whole strategy, or this whole paradigm of thinking about these epochs, I did some thinking about the fact that the tasks of adolescence are identity, who am I, and autonomy, how am I unique and different, and what's the extent of my control in the world, and then affinity, to whom and where do I belong. And it kind of dawned on me, and I developed this a little bit in the book, that each of those epochs kind of focused on one of those more than the others. I call it the long leg of the three-legged stool. And so in Youth Ministry 1.0, the long leg of the three-legged stool was identity, the who am I question. And in 2.0, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the focus seemed to be much more on autonomy. How am I unique and different? What's the extent of my control? And my suggestion is that the shift now needs to be to affinity, that the real need of today's teenagers is to find belonging. That's the real key word there. Now, all that's set up, and let me get to the point. I was having lunch 2 weeks ago with Dave Gibbons, the senior pastor of New Song Church in Irvine. He's the author of this great new book called The Monkey and the Fish, and I just read it last week. I had a couple days away with my family down in Mexico, and I read it sitting on the beach in the beautiful, blazing Mexico sunlight. Sorry to those of you who live in cold climates. Anyhow, a great little book, and I met with Dave and had lunch with him at the National Pastors Convention, and then I read his book, and he said something to me over lunch as we were talking about the concepts of his book before I read it, and the concepts of my book, and that kind of took me back a little bit, or made me step back and think. I laid out for him what I just laid out for you in response to his question of what has changed in youth culture. And he was very affirming and said all kinds of nice things because he's a really nice guy. And then he kind of pushed back a little bit and said, I think what you're really talking about is being contextual. And I agreed. Yes, I think all of us in our own context need to be like environmentalists, and we need to understand the context and then discern what God is calling us to do in our local ministries rather than copying the big church down the street or across town. Dave's pushback was, maybe it's not that we've gone in a linear movement from a need for identity to the next phase with a need for autonomy to this new phase where we have a need for belonging. Maybe it's that need is different and unique in every community. And if we're really talking about communal discernment and contextualization, maybe we need to drop the idea of having these linear epics and talk about the idea of that every community, every youth ministry, every group of kids is unique and different and has different needs, and that need can change, those needs can change and shift. And while that kind of undermines some of the ideas of my book that I really hope you'll read, it's been a really challenging thought to me that I need to wrestle with some more. I do think still that the dominant need of teenagers today is belonging more than those other issues. But I think there are certainly places like, as Dave and I talked, for like third culture kids who come, are like second generation Korean Americans, for example, for whom identity is a huge issue and really probably trumps the other two. And there would be a sense, I think, even as we look at different ministry contexts and different economic situations, different racial situations, different parts of the country, different kinds of churches and theological priorities in churches, different economic times in our nation, different historical issues going on, different things going on in the lives of the kids in the group, that those priorities could continue to shift on a regular basis, which is why, my friends, you and I need to really develop the ability and the practice of ongoing discernment so that we can develop contextualized ministries and relationships, that we can be incarnational with kids in the way that Christ was incarnational into our world, talking about the real world that they live in and the specific needs that are the priority for them. So my question for you as you get together with your youth worker friends or take a little moment to do some journaling is this: which of those three adolescent tasks, identity, who am I? Autonomy, how am I unique and different? What's the extent of my control or power in the world? And affinity, to whom and where do I belong? Which of those seem to be the unique need of the kids in your youth ministry right now? And how might that be different than, say, 2 years ago in your church, if you've been around? How might you see some change be taking place in that? Talk about that and get back to me later. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching the show this week. I want to invite you to connect with me. You can send me an email at adam@youthspecialties.com or look me up on Facebook or MySpace or Twitter or any of those other things out there. If you use it, we use it, you can look me up. It'll be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Seriously, you can send me pictures of your kids. It'll be great. Anyways, we want to remind you, just like we do every week, that your ministry matters. We know you don't hear it enough, and we want you to hear from our heart to yours, that the ministry that you do to students totally matters. It matters to those students, but it also matters to their parents who never thank you. I'm thanking you for them, but most importantly, it matters to the heart of God. Thanks for what you do, and we'll see you next week.